Hi everybody, it's Misty again from the Suburban Edge, that place between the country and the city where together we can explore modern homesteading skills. Today I'm going to be doing a lot of oven roasting. I'm making one of my favorite dishes. Mark loves it too. Kids, not so much. But I am going to show you how easy it is to work with butter beans or gigantes. Yeah, it's another bean dish. But I promise you, you'll really like it. I like to use the Royal Corona beans from Rancho Gordo. It's hard sometimes, depending on where you live, to find really big lima beans, and that's what a butter bean is. It's just a lima bean on steroids. The first thing I want to do is roast a Poblano pepper. Let's get started. I have here my Poblano pepper washed and dried on a baking sheet. The oven is preheated to 425 degrees. I'm putting my favorite oil on. It happens to be avocado oil. Olive oil works great. You just want to give it a little bath. Make sure it's nice and oiled up. Pop it in the oven for 6 to 8 minutes on each side. So you will need to keep an eye on it. You don't want to overcook your pepper. You just want that skin to be nicely charred. A Poblano pepper is just slightly hotter than a green pepper. It's not as hot as a jalapeno, but it does add a nice intensity. So having one on hand roasted, it goes quickly. It adds a smoky intensity that I think you're really going to like. Is this pepper optional in this dish? Absolutely. But we love it, so I'm roasting it. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about my life-saving tomatoes. And I mean tomatoes. When I found out I was going to need a complete mastectomy on the right side, I asked Mark to build me a garden. I have been wanting a garden for a really long time, but being work from home people, we didn't really have a lot of free time to rototill the dirt, make a garden. But he got busy and discovered gardening in straw bales, and in about a 2-week time period we had a garden built with straw bales. Here's a picture of me with my beautiful tomatoes. Well, I'm going to tell you, those tomatoes in that garden probably saved my life. We were putting that garden together up until the day before my mastectomy surgery. My kids were out there. We were frantically planting, and it was a rush job. We got that garden planted. I had my surgery. I recovered, and it turns out that toward midsummer, when it was really getting hot and I was having at that point then chemotherapy, that garden saved my life. I needed that garden to take care of. The watering system that we chose wasn't really working, so I ended up having to get out of bed sometimes every morning and water that garden, and it was so healing for me. And I was a tomato whisperer. The problem is I had chemotherapy and it killed my taste buds. Of all the things I had been through, not being able to taste anything for an entire summer was torture. I love to cook. I love food. And I was so sad that my beautiful homegrown tomatoes tasted like nothing in my mouth. So I froze most of them, and I highly recommend it. It's a great thing to do for later in the winter. It's January now, and I have canned most of my tomatoes, but I saved aside 1 gallon Ziploc for this specific project. So what I have here is a tray of about 2 pounds of frozen tomatoes, maybe a little more. And we're going to make an oven roasted tomato sauce, because now that I can taste them, they taste like summer. Here's our roasted Poblano pepper, nicely charred, ready to pop into a bowl and put a lid on it, saran wrap, put a plate over the top, whatever. I have these little silicone lids I like to use whenever I can find a bowl they fit on. Set this aside till the poblano pepper cools enough, but also the steam will help that skin release. We're going to skin this. In the meantime, we're ready to get our tomato sauce going for our delicious bean and tomato dinner. Now it's time to get our tomatoes roasting. Here's what we're going to do. We need 2 pounds of tomatoes. Some recipes tell you cut side up, some recipes tell you cut side down. I'm going to tell you, I'm not sure it matters. I'm just going to put my frozen tomatoes on this sheet pan right here. And they're still pretty frozen, but that's going to work in our favor. The next thing we need are 6 to 8 garlic cloves minced. We're just going to put those all over the sheet pan. Now, when I tell you 6 to 8 garlic cloves, that's what I mean. I tell my kids that if you find a recipe and it tells you to use 3 garlic cloves, that means you're supposed to double it and put 6. I'm already doubling it, so don't double this. Don't add more garlic. It's plenty garlicky. We also want a teaspoon of Italian herb seasoning, a half a teaspoon sugar, a teaspoon of kosher salt, a half a teaspoon of coarse ground pepper, and 2 tablespoons of olive oil. Some recipes will tell you to put olive oil on the pan first and then put your tomatoes on. I just do it all at once. And I put all my seasonings in a bowl. We're just going to mix those up and just sprinkle them over the top. I know that seems really chaotic, but it will be delicious. And that's my sugar. Sugar's optional, but I do like the flavor that it brings out. And then 2 tablespoons of olive oil. It's a brand new olive oil. And you just put it all over the tomatoes. I'm just mixing that all in. That's why it doesn't matter if the olive oil's on the bottom or not. My nice chunky frozen tomatoes. They won't stick. It'll be beautiful. Trust me. This is going to go into the oven for about 30 to 40 minutes. I'm periodically going to check it. You want to pull it out when the skins start to lift up from the tomatoes. Now these are frozen. The skins will fall off anyway. So what I'm looking for is the tomatoes are going to start to break apart rather easily. And I'll show you what that looks like. But 30 to 40 minutes, check periodically. Into the oven they go. While the tomatoes are roasting, I took an opportunity to get some dishes done and also chop up a little over a cup of a kielbasa sausage. We like the Russian sausage you can buy at Winco. Sorry, I don't know the brand, but any smoked sausage will do. And also, if you want to make this vegetarian, you clearly don't have to put this in. And this is a big bowl of my lima beans, my big butter beans that I previously cooked and put in the freezer. I like to cook my beans without any seasoning unless I'm using a very specific recipe. If I'm just pre-cooking beans to use later, I don't season them. I prefer them to be able to take on the flavors I want them to have when I'm going to use them. But it's about 3 cups, maybe 3.5 cups of cooked beans. Now, I will link the recipe down below. The amount of beans is totally up to you. If you're going to use small white beans like navy beans or cannelloni beans, you may need to punch up the amount of beans so that your tomato to bean ratio makes sense. We love to use these big butter beans because they are a really big meaty bite of food. You don't need to add any pasta to this tomato sauce. The beans act in place of that and pack a powerful nutritional punch to a really great favorite of ours, a really great dish. I hope you try it. And let's move on with the next step. It's been about 15 minutes and I checked it and the tomatoes are definitely breaking apart. It's time to pull it out. If you're using fresh tomatoes, it will probably take a little bit longer. And my tomatoes were Cherokee purples and they are very juicy, so I have a lot of extra liquid here. Not to worry. When I take the skins off of these tomatoes and break them all up, this will be a really great tomato sauce for our bean dish. I'm going to let it cool a little bit, then I'm going to pull the skins off. They're falling off anyway, but I want to pick them all out and get rid of those, and then just mash up the tomatoes into this lovely liquid. It's going to be delicious. My sheet pan cooled down and I just dug in there with my fingers and picked out all the skin, and I'm going to just stir this around, break up the tomato, and get it incorporated into the juices, olive oil. And it smells amazing. I need to take the skin off my poblano pepper. It's probably cool enough now. So I'll show you how I do that. It's nice and cool. The skin should pick right off, just like that. So we don't want to eat that part. Have the skin picked off and have opened up the pepper, cleaned out all the seeds, membranes, the stem. And this is what I'm left with. And I'm just going to slice it in fairly thin slices, about like that. And put it in my tomato sauce. This is also when I'm going to add the beans to the sauce, and I will pan fry the kielbasa just to caramelize a little bit before I put it in the dish. So that's going to go in last. I'm not going to roast it in the sheet pan. I'm going to cook it up in a frying pan. Okay, I have my poblano pepper strips in there and just going to incorporate it all around. We're not going to cook this as long as we did to roast the tomatoes. Now I remember my tomatoes were frozen, they cooked up a little quicker, but I want to hit this with a 400-degree heat to get all those flavors to incorporate with each other and also meld into my unseasoned butter beans. So they're going in right now. I had these beans in the freezer and have defrosted them over the last couple days. So they're just cold, and they need that heat in the oven to just bring up all of these flavors. And this is, oh, so good. I just want to get the beans completely covered with this tomato mixture. And that's good. I'm going to put this back in a 400-degree oven for about 15 to 20 minutes. I have my skillet going medium-high heat. It's definitely up to temperature. I can feel it. And I have my little pieces of kielbasa here. I want to add a little fat to the pan, but not much. I'm just going to put a splash of canola oil here. I want to put some color on these guys. I mean, it's a smoked sausage, it's already cooked, but I really like to get a little caramelization on them. So I'm just going to zap them in my pan for a little bit. So you can imagine how great it smells in here. And I'm going to zoom in and just show you what we're looking for, just a little color. I'm going to get these out of the pan, back into the original bowl, and set it aside for the next step. I pulled my sheet pan out of my oven and it's pretty hot. But what I want to do is add my kielbasa just to this whole dish. I strained out a lot of the oil before I put it back in the bowl. And you can add less or more, none if you want. We like it for that little bit of flavor, but you can see the star of the show really is these giant beans. I'm going to let that cool. I'm going to come back and give it a taste and adjust any seasonings if needed. But this is my completed dish. We like to serve this with a little bit of bread for dipping, or just Mark and I will eat this for lunch for the next week. We absolutely love this dish. It's very good for you and pretty simple to put together. Few steps, but really no real skills. I will tell you that Any beans you find are going to have cooking instructions on the back. It's not a big deal. I love to use the Rancho Gordo Royal Corona beans for this. They get nice and big. But I don't cook them on the stove like they suggest. I cook them in my Instant Pot according to the Instant Pot instructions. It works fine for me and it's a lot quicker. Don't tell them. You can find giant beans online. These are not your little hard green lima beans you might be used to. These are really buttery, really creamy. That's why they're called butter beans. I highly recommend you step out of your lima bean hatred, if you have it, and give these butter beans a try. They will change your mind about lima beans. And I hope I did too. If you want the recipe, there's a link to my website down below. You can find all the recipes that you see on the Suburban Edge. Also, while you're down there, could you click the like button if you liked this video? And don't be afraid to subscribe. Until next time, I'm Misty from the Suburban Edge.